Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
We're not from Memphis, but we love it.
Welcome to Memphis Type History, the podcast.
So let's do this.
Cool.
So today on the podcast, I have John R. Stevenson, and he's going to talk to me about Libertyland.
Thanks for having me, Caitlin. I love talking Libertyland, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you. So back in the day, you actually wrote an article. I don't know if you even remember. Because it's been a while, for Memphis Type History, the blog.
Yep, that was, I think, over 3 years ago now, which is crazy to think it's been that long.
So catch us up on what's happened since then.
Yeah, well, it's kind of ironic. About that same time that I wrote that blog post, my eventual publisher for the book approached me and asked if I was interested in writing a book about Libertyland as part of their Images of Modern America series. And at the time, I was living in Chicago. I was in grad school and was looking for a full-time job. And at that time, the timing wasn't right. And so I kind of fished it around Memphis with some people that I knew to see if there was any interest. And there wasn't. So not that there wasn't any interest, just no one was able to take on the project. So kind of moved on and still in the back of my head. And so fast forward 2 years later to June of 2016, or June 2016, I graduated from the University of Memphis with my master's, and at that time had been living in Nashville for several months. And so I felt like at that time, the timing was right. I had, more free time, and I felt like I could really devote the time and energy that something like this requires. And so I went back to the publisher, Arcadia Publishing, and asked if the offer, the interest on their end was still there. And so fast forward another year, and here we are. So it's been a crazy 3 years between now and then.
That's so cool. So you had a website about Libertyland, right? And then you also have a roller coaster, more general roller coaster website.
Yes.
And now you have a book. So tell us about all three of those things. What's on these websites, what's inside the book, and a little bit about just your history, how you came to be interested in all these things.
Sure. So way back when I first visited Libertyland when I was 5, it was my first amusement park. The Zippin Pippin was my first roller coaster. And I like to think that visit really sparked my interest in roller coasters. Prior to then, I really didn't know what they were, but I remember so vividly that first ride on the Zippin Pippin, and it was terrifying and exciting, and I was amazed by the experience. And so I think that was one of the early memories that sparked that passion, what has become a passion for roller coasters. And in 2005, I started coaster101.com, which is a kind of a general roller coaster amusement industry website. There are 7 riders, including myself, who travel the country and beyond riding roller coasters, writing about them. And I love riding. I'm a journalism major in school, and so I've always enjoyed riding. And so to be able to combine that with my love for roller coasters and thrill rides and theme parks has been something that I've really enjoyed. And so about the time that I started coaster101.com, a few months after that, it was announced that Libertyland was closing. And by that time, I had visited the park. I had grown up with the park and had so many fond memories of Libertyland. And so it was devastating for a 14-year-old to see that, the park was going to be closed and that potentially would never ride the Zippin Pippin again. And so I got involved with Save Libertyland as much as a 14-year-old could, and, very passionate about doing everything that I could, to save and reopen the park. And I guess 7 or 8 months later, the park was auctioned off. Thankfully, the carousel was not included in that, thanks in part to Save Libertyland and the people who were able to, bring to light the fact that the city still owned the carousel. And so when it was pretty clear that Libertyland wasn't going to be saved, I wanted to start a memorial or something to kind of keep the memories of the park alive and act as a hub for memories and photos and videos. There's a former park in Nashville you might be aware of, Opryland USA, which closed in 97. And there's a similar website that exists just to keep, to act as a hub for photos and videos and memories and, as a place for former employees to connect. And so from Coaster 101 started this sort of an offshoot, Remember Libertyland, and over the years, it developed, and I started a Facebook page and a Twitter for it, and it kind of caught on. People started using the Facebook page as a way to share photos and share memories of their time at the park, people who visited, people who worked there, and the audience grew. And in 2010, I was a sophomore. When I was a sophomore at the University of Memphis, I went to an event where Jimmy Ogle was speaking, and famous Memphis historian / legend Jimmy Ogle. And
yes, total legend.
Exactly. And I couldn't believe I didn't know of him until, I was born and raised in Memphis, and that was the first time I was listening to him speak. And I didn't even know he was in any way involved with Libertyland. And so he began to speak, and it was just, I think, a general Memphis history overview. And he started talking about Libertyland. And of course, I just was lit up. And so afterwards, I went up to him and introduced myself and told him about my Remember Libertyland website. And there he had kind of Libertyland, Save Libertyland, had kind of morphed into Remember Libertyland on their side as an actual organization. And they were, I think at that point, they were preparing to build the historical marker, which is on East Parkway near the intersection of East Parkway and Young Avenue. And so he was able to give me a piece of Zippin Pippin, an actual piece of the wood and the track. And so
wow,
that was very cool. Yeah. So
what a treasure.
Exactly. I guard it to this day. I mean, it's so cool to have that. And so anyway, I have kept up with him over the years, and he was actually able to write the foreword to the book, which was just, I could not have asked for a better way to start this book than with the wise words of Jimmy Ogle. And so the book itself is really a chronological look of the park from before it was Libertyland, which it was. At first, the Fairgrounds Amusement Park was the predecessor to Libertyland, and it opened in the 1920s, and that's when the Zippin Pippin was built, the carousel was built. Those were both built new in 1923, which is often thought that the Zippin Pippin was built in 1912. There's all these stories of how the Zippin Pippin came to be and how it opened, and but it was actually built new as far as all of the historical documents that I was able to uncover, thanks to many historians who helped contribute to the book. And so it kind of starts there at the fairgrounds and then proceeds to kind of the idea for Libertyland, and of course the design and construction and the years that it operated, and then unfortunately its closure and what happened. So it's really from start to finish the life of this amusement park and what effect it had on Memphis, and how special it was, really, in the fact that it was one of the first amusement parks to kind of be modeled after Disneyland on a smaller scale. And so up to that point, amusement parks had been thought of as more of a generic, unthemed kind of assortment of rides, whereas Libertyland was very distinctly themed. You had Colonial Land, turn of the century land, Frontierland, each of which had very distinct themes and vibes and really celebrated different eras of America's history. And so it was very much a trendsetter in that sense, because before then you did not have a theme park on a regional scale. It was very much Disneyland and in those larger parks like that. So it was, a unique park at the time of its inception.
That's so interesting. I had no idea that it was inspired or modeled after Disneyland at all. That is so cool.
Yeah, it was really designed as a miniature Disneyland. That's and you look at some of the rides, like the canoes that once traveled around in the moat that surrounded Tom Sawyer Island. I mean, that was, to this day, Disneyland still operates its canoes. And so there were really some interesting parallels between the two parks. Obviously different scales, but it was very much so a miniature Disneyland for Memphis.
So why don't you set the scene for us a little bit, because you've already touched on a little bit of those things that made it so special, the atmosphere, the flavor of it. And I think I would really love to dive into that, because I was there very briefly as a kid at one time, and I just have a very blip of a memory of Libertyland and not even really spending time in the park, just sort of passing through. And so I would love for those of us who really didn't get to experience it, what was it like? Tell us, give us that, set the stage, if
Sure.
you will.
So, well, I have full disclosure. I first visited the park in 1997. And so by that point, the park was 21 years old. And unfortunately, it had over the years kind of lost those distinct Americana themes. But as part of this book writing journey, I probably combed through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 pictures of the park from all stages of its life, from the designs, from the blueprints of the park to its construction and early years. And really, I think the golden years of when it opened on July 4th, 1976, the America's bicentennial, through the mid 80s, I think were the golden days of the park. And so I think when you walked in and you saw these artifacts of American history, you saw the replica of the Liberty Bell, you saw this architecture, this Williamsburg style colonial architecture, you saw the old Frisco steam engine and the caboose, and you walk through and you saw one of the first things, one of the most vivid memories I have of walking through that park. And kind of an interesting thing is because it was the Fairgrounds Amusement Park prior, it had been operating essentially as an amusement park for decades. And so one of the unique things about the park was especially when you walked into the entrance, you had these old, massive trees that you just don't see with amusement parks of that time, especially that were built from the ground up. So you walked in, and it's one of my favorite things about Memphis in general is just the canopy of trees that cover the city. And so
yes.
You walk through, especially in that area, that historic area, Cooper Young, Midtown in general. And so you walked in and there were just these massive trees. And granted, for a kid, everything is, larger than life. And then you kept walking and you saw the Zippin Pippin towering overhead, and you could hear the screams and that iconic wooden coaster sound. And so it was very much an immersive experience walking in, especially in the early days. And I think one of the most underappreciated aspects of Libertyland was just the plants. There were so many plants and shrubs and trees and gardens. I mean, it was immaculate. And I think especially as a first-time visitor, guests would walk in and it would just be this just beautiful, serene, lush environment. And then you had the historic style architecture and the Independence train station. And then you walk through and then you entered turn of the century land, which obviously kind of celebrated that turn of the centuries, more of like a county fair, very ornate kind of design. You had kind of the flat rides, the traditional flat rides like the Tilt-A-Whirl and the Scrambler, Twain's Twister, the Spider, which is funny because many of those rides had existed in the Fairgrounds Amusement Park. Obviously not the same ones, but you had that kind of that county fair vibe. And then you kept walking and you entered Frontierland and that kind of that Western expansion, just that the old kind of woodsman, handcrafted feeling. You went into the gift shops with all these handcrafted goods, and it was such the historic log cabins. There were 3 historic log cabins that were brought in from different areas in Tennessee that were donated. So it was very much an immersive experience. I mean, it was even in its later years, it was a relatively small park, but you could still go in and especially in kind of once you got into the middle of the park, it was very much an escape from everyday life. And I think that's why it was so special and so enjoyable, because for just a while you could escape just the real world and any stresses or distractions, I guess, and just kind of enjoy yourself, enjoy your family, your friends, with this quaint amusement park in the background, the rides, the shows. It was just very much I think something that the entire family could enjoy. And I think that was that was the appeal, that you could take your family there for a day. Everyone could get something out of the experience, play games, eat food, ride rides, watch shows. In its early days, there were entertainers dressed as Colonial characters and clowns that would roam the midways. It was very much a special place for a lot of people, especially who visited in its early days.
I love that. That's so cool. That really helps me see why people really love it so much. And every time you bring up Libertyland, there's just like a outpouring of memories and nostalgia for the place.
It is there's so much nostalgia there, and I think everyone has a Libertyland story, and I think that's what's so special about it. You have the story of I rode the Zippin Pippin when I was 5. I thought I was going to fall out, or I went on my first date at Libertyland, or I had my first job at Libertyland, or I saw Elvis at Libertyland, or I started my career, my entertainment career at Libertyland. There so many entertainers today got their start at Libertyland. I think that's why it holds such a special place in so many people's hearts, is because it was just so many memories and experiences there that I don't think there's anything like that in Memphis today, where you can go and have such an immersive experience that really kind of removes you from the real world and transports you into this leisurely, kind of no worries, just an enjoyable place. It's unfortunate that the younger generation won't be able to experience that. I tell people it's heartbreaking when I hear, when I'm talking with someone either that's younger or is maybe new to Memphis, and they say, "What's Libertyland?" It hurts that that some people won't be able to experience what so many Memphians were able to.
So I have a ton more questions about Libertyland, and I want to go into details about some of the stuff you've already brought up. Before that, though, because I know that's going to just send us down the rabbit hole, I do want to know a little bit more about what it was like in its original, before it was Libertyland, when it was just the fairgrounds or that early iteration. And since you did pull up so many photos and you did so much research for the book, I think you're probably the guy who can tell me about that place and what that original, vibe was.
Yeah. So the Fairgrounds Amusement Park kind of came from, obviously it was part of the fairgrounds. The name kind of gives it away, but
which means what exactly? Being part of the fairgrounds?
Sure. So the Mid-South Fairgrounds, where today, the Liberty Bowl stands, Tiger Lane, Mid-South Coliseum, the Children's Museum, that kind of block. It's East Parkway, Central, Southern. What am I forgetting?
Oh, the street that crosses the railroad tracks behind the stadium?
Yeah, early Maxwell, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's some football player, right? Or a coach,
sure.
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, and actually, I'm not the probably the best person to talk about the fairgrounds. Gentleman who helped me immensely. His name should be on the cover of this book. John Delaney is an expert with the Mid-South Fairgrounds, just knows everything there is to know. And really that entire chapter would not have been possible without him. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the Mid-South Fairgrounds. But essentially, the short of how the Fairgrounds Amusement Park came to be, the Mid-South Fair was a success, a huge success. Obviously, it was so important for the region that the organizers in the city kind of wanted to capitalize on that success. Obviously, with it being an event, it was only going on for a portion of the year. They wanted a way to kind of extend that success and continue having people spend money and come to the area. And so the Fairgrounds Amusement Park was created as a way to kind of lengthen the visits or increase the frequency of people's visits to the park. So along with the Zippin Pippin and the carousel, there were some other kind of common fairground type rides that you would find in an amusement park. So like the Spider and a Ferris wheel and the Old Mill ride, which was like an indoor kind of campy haunted boat ride. The Noah's Ark ride, which is, I think there's only one remaining in the country. It's kind of a walk-through funhouse type setup. And over time, there were more rides added. In the 50s, there was a Kiddieland area, which was geared specifically towards kids. And so it was such a success. So it was more of it wasn't that immersive type feel. It was really just more so an assortment of amusement park rides. And so I like to think that that amusement park kind of set the stage for Libertyland. It kind of sparked the idea of city leaders who kind of saw this and its success and thought, hey, maybe there's a way we can take this to another level capitalize on the interest. There was obviously an interest in an amusement park, a leisure park in Memphis, because so many people were visiting it. And it's funny, a lot of people don't know, but there was also an amusement park near where Overton Square stands today called East End Park, and it also had a roller coaster. It's a myth that the Zippin Pippin was actually built at East End Park and was moved to Libertyland. As far as everyone who I spoke to can tell in all the research that I did, that was not the case. The roller coasters that operated there were torn down with the park, I believe, which closed in 1912, maybe perhaps later. So anyway, so there was, in that day, those types of trolley parks, as they were called, because the trolleys would move people to and from the park. For whatever reason, the Fairgrounds Amusement Park was kind of the one that of the two that survived. And so it, by the 50s and the 60s, it had enjoyed many, many years of success. And I think some people caught on to its success, and by this time Disneyland was well established, and that kind of started the wheel turning, so to speak, to design and to build this amusement park on the site, or this miniature theme park on the site of the Fairgrounds Amusement Park. So really, Libertyland, I think we have the Fairgrounds Amusement Park to thank, because otherwise I don't think you would have had that inspiration or that belief that Memphis could support a theme park like Libertyland.
Interesting. So one thing that I have definitely seen and get the feel for about Libertyland is that, just like Memphis, it was a little weird. And so I'd like to talk about some of the weird aspects of Libertyland, maybe the weirdest shows or the weirdest quirks, or some of your favorite just weird Libertyland things.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I so wish that Libertyland was around to this day, was still here, because I just think as over the years, Memphis has embraced its weirdness, or kind of that the grit and grind. Memphis doesn't try to be something it's not. It's very authentic. That's one of the things I love the most about Memphis. And so I think Libertyland, I think there's so many just little things that I hear, especially like the uniforms that in the early days that the employees wore, these colonial dresses, and you had the colonial soldiers who marched around the park. And that wasn't necessarily unique to Libertyland, because obviously Disneyland had been doing it, but it was on that smaller scale. So you had in the Creative Arts building, which is now the Women's building, and in the basement of that building, you had these seamstresses who handmade every single uniform.
What?
Yes, it was like hours and hours and hours spent on those uniforms. You had the shows, and not that those were weird, but they were. Melinda Grable was the park's entertainment director from the day it opened until the day it closed. The hours that were put into those shows, and award-winning shows on a national level. But then you had the smaller things like the Injun Joe's canoes that circled Tom Sawyer's Island, which was kind of a playground for kids. And so I had all of these pictures. I got stories for many of them, but there were still some that I just couldn't get the story behind, or the full story. And so there's one picture that stands out, and I don't believe I was able to include it in the book. But it was in one of the little ponds or lagoons, and it was a giant log, and I don't know what the correct term for it, but you had two people that were on the log, I guess, trying to knock one another off. So just something like that. I have no idea what the purpose of that was. Then you had the world's longest love seat, which was this long, I don't remember, it was probably a redwood tree or something like that, but it had seats carved into it. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know when it left the park, but in the early days, it was just this long log, essentially, with seats carved into it. The petting zoos, you had these large petting zoos that were kind of scattered throughout the Frontierland area. So you could go and pet goats and all these different sheep and alpacas or llamas or something like that. I mean, it was just, there were so many just weird, quirky things about the park that really made it. Those are the pictures when I was researching and kind of organizing everything for the book, those are the pictures that stand out in my mind. The dolphin show, the sea lions. It was such an eclectic park, I think, especially in kind of the 80s and 90s time frame when it was branched off from that strictly American themed park, but it still had these little quirks and just characters like the clowns. There were so many clowns in the parks in the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure what it was, but the giant paper flowers that the Colonial dress employees would make, these tissue paper flowers. And I spoke to one former employee that was just like, those were the biggest pain to make, but they were just so cool. You don't see things like that in amusement parks today, that those handmade like giant paper flowers.
Yeah, we had someone commented and left that was one of their memories on that blog post at memphistypehistory.com that you wrote, was about getting those paper flowers.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, there are things like that. I've been to amusement parks all over the country, and you just don't see, like, some do have the handcrafted craftsman handmade goods like Libertyland did, which I think was unique as well. But you just don't have those types of, I guess, little knickknacks, I guess, that, you know, were handmade like that. It's just, there are so many little weird things about the park that just make me love it even more.
Yeah. So some of those weird pictures, even the ones you couldn't really get the full story on, do you think we could put those on the show notes for this episode? Just so people can see them?
Yeah, for sure. That was one of the hardest things of this book, was the format was very much set by the publisher, just because it is part of a series. And so the length was set. I mean, I could have easily written a book that was twice as long. This book is 96 pages long, and it would have been very, very easy to surpass 200 pages. And I think that was one of the hardest things about the book, was having to narrow down the images and that were featured. I mean, there were just so many, and it was really, really hard. Once over the next year, hopefully, is to build out rememberlibertyland.com and add a lot of those photos that I wasn't able to include. And I've had some people come forward now that the book's been out and said, "Oh, I've got all these stories." And I tried to broadcast as much as I could the need for photos and stories, but wasn't able to include all of them. And so, definitely would be more than happy to share some of those.
Awesome. So they'll be at memphistypehistory.com/Libertyland for the show notes for this episode, for those of you following along and want to see them. You mentioned the dolphin show, the sea lions, and I'd love to know, I guess I find the performances and the shows around Libertyland to be really interesting. And I've seen some weird pictures. And I know there were a lot of like just Memphis characters who had maybe TV shows, radio shows. Did they ever pop up in Libertyland as well? I've heard a story about a roller skating monkey that perhaps learned how to skate at Skateland and then maybe performed at Libertyland. We could never really make that connection for sure, but just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Zippy the chimp might be who you're referring to. He performed at the park regularly for many, I can't recall how many years, but I think he lived on site with his two human parents. So he would perform, like I said earlier, I think Libertyland really was a launch pad for a lot of people, especially in regards to the shows. I guess Melinda Grable was the park's entertainment director, and she was just wonderful. I mean, so dedicated to the park. Libertyland was really a source of pride for a lot of those people. And to this day, you have people who have maintained contact and are very close with some of those other performers. And so, you know, because Memphis has such musical history, its musical heritage, that really went hand in hand with Libertyland shows, especially in the early days. There were 3 or 4 theaters. And so you had all these different shows, and it really was a place for aspiring entertainers to get their starts. And it was funny, when I was interviewing Melinda for the book, she said that Libertyland would often trade performers with Opryland in Nashville, the former Opryland amusement park, and people would go there and perform and would come back, or vice versa. And so Jerry Lawler, I believe, was very involved with the park. There were the televised matches that took place at the park. And so there were many local celebrities who were very much involved with Libertyland. And there was a TV show, a daredevil type TV show that filmed an episode at the park where one of the stuntmen, they took one of the cars of the Revolution, which was the steel looping roller coaster, kind of retrofitted it with essentially skis. And he skied the track of the Revolution with the loops and the corkscrews. So there were a lot of people personalities, I guess you could say, that were very ingrained in Libertyland or definitely made an impact on the park.
You don't even really get a test run for that sort of thing, skiing the roller coaster, right?
Yeah, I love roller coasters. I love the thrill, the adrenaline, but I think that's definitely where I would draw the line.
Oh, man. Rebecca and I have had this experience of sort of collecting stories, putting them together with history, rumor, lore, all those things in a book. And so I totally get even what you're saying about I put it out there for stories and I got so many after it's already in print and, what do I do with them? And so I think I'd really like to know, are there any memories or stories that just totally stumped you that someone told you about? Or really sent you down a rabbit trail or anything like that?
Not memories, but one of the things that just got to me or that I couldn't just let go, and I am determined I will find out the answer to this. And it's not directly related to Libertyland, but so when Libertyland was being designed, kind of this idea was being floated around. It was very much a fight for the people who wanted to build it. I mean, everyone wasn't on board immediately. There were definitely some hurdles that had to be overcome, but supposedly, and there are news articles that back this claim, that there was a mystery developer that was publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange that came forward when Libertyland was being designed, that wanted to build a theme park on the land that is now known as Shelby Farms, the old penal farm, and it would have been allegedly would have rivaled Disneyland in its size. And so
wow,
that's just been one of the things that I didn't know beforehand. I know a lot of, that in Libertyland's later years the idea had been toyed around to move Libertyland to the Agri Center, but supposedly they were somewhat serious about building a major theme park on the site of the penal farm. And so it's really interesting to think, play the what if game of, what if that had happened, and no one's been able to confirm who it was or what happened to it. Obviously they kind of backed away from it for whatever we don't know the reasoning, but that was one of the things that just kind of stumped me of who was it. And it's just I think the journalist within me, I really wanted to go and kind of chase that down and try to figure out who it was, how serious their plans were. But as far as the park itself, memories or things that stumped me, I can't think of any one off the top of my head, but there were pictures that I would come across that I couldn't really match up with, I guess, the timeline of the park. There would be certain rides that, it looked like they had operated at Libertyland, but they didn't. There was
what? That seems weird to me.
Yeah. So there was one, because basically when I was given photos, I got a lot of press releases from the park. So there would be things that were referenced that I couldn't find pictures of, or I would find one picture of, and I would ask, did this ride actually open? What happened to it? More so from just the roller coaster nerd in me, just the amusement park geek with the different rides. And so on the grand scale of things, they're relatively minuscule, but there was also a very small kids roller coaster that operated from when it opened through the early 80s, I believe. And nobody really knows what happened to it. It obviously closed and left the park, but why? Just little things like that, kind of dead ends that I wasn't able to really pin down. And I'm sure I talked to so many people and took so many notes that I'm sure there are some interesting things that I wasn't able to chase down. But I think that developer will still just kind of stick with me until I can figure out. I just want to know what did they plan? It's just, it'd be so interesting to see what they were considering, just given the size of Shelby Farms. I love Shelby Farms as it is today. Don't get me wrong. It's one of my favorite places in Memphis, but to think of it as some Disney World size theme park resort is certainly interesting.
Yeah. What a different place it would be if that had happened.
Because I think one of the things that I think that's always going to hinder Libertyland was its size. I mean, it was essentially landlocked, and just for it to have expanded, it would have really, I think, conflicted with the Liberty Bowl and the fairgrounds. And so it was really, in that sense, I mean, for amusement parks to be successful, they have to be able to grow in some way. And, parks that are landlocked can do a great job of fitting in rides and into small spaces, but Libertyland was small to begin with, and it really just did not have a lot of room to expand. And so you combine that with the financial hardships that the park faced. And I think if Libertyland had been built at Shelby Farms, what is now Shelby Farms, I think it definitely might have ended differently. Perhaps, you'll never know, but
because I guess, is it because you need to grow so that there's something new to keep people coming back to?
Yeah, that's to an extent. I think there were a number of factors that contributed to the park's demise, but you have to build things to keep people coming back. And especially in the park's later years, what it was able to add was it just wasn't enough to bring people back. And so you had a park that was already small, and then the lack of attractions, and they did everything that they could. People who were really dedicated to the park did everything they could. Yeah, obviously, there were some conflicts of interest there, I think, but I mean, the fair essentially had kept Libertyland alive. The success of the fair in its later years, the fair also, I think, was facing some decline in popularity, and so it couldn't support the park, and it was kind of a nail in the coffin, so to speak, for the park.
Can you talk a little bit about that interplay between the fair and the park?
Sure. And I tried to avoid in the book getting too political, just because the wounds are relatively fresh. I mean, they're 10, 12 years old now, but everyone has an opinion on that, who is to blame. And I've always said, I don't think there's any one person to blame for the park's downfall. I think it was a number of factors, but I do think that the fair and Libertyland was owned by the Mid-South Fair. Mid-South Fair was in charge of running it. Originally, they had been separate. So you had Libertyland's board of directors or Libertyland's management and the Mid-South Fairs. And I can't remember the day that happened, but it was after Libertyland had been losing money, that they were combined. And so the Mid-South Fair oversaw the park, and I think the focus was on the Mid-South Fair, and it was generating more money. And at the end of the day, it is a business, and even though it's a nonprofit, they were still obviously aiming to be as successful as possible. And so, I don't want to speculate or make any assumptions, but I know there were people who had their heart and soul poured into Libertyland and really wanted to see it succeed, and who'd been there from the beginning, and not necessarily there are people who wanted it to fail, but people who were focused more on the fair. And I know I spoke to people who were involved with the vote to close the park, and they said that there were tears. I mean, it was just heartbreaking to make that decision. And when I was a kid and this was all happening, I just thought I just saw this room full of evil villains who were just, laughing, and were, voting to close the park. But that wasn't the case. There were people who were very, very much dedicated to the park and had seen it grow up and wanted nothing but success for it. But at the end of the day, it was they just weren't able to keep it afloat financially. And you can argue that there could have been things done, and it's one of those coulda, shoulda, woulda games. And I think the fair and Libertyland being owned and operated or managed by the same group, I think was possibly not the smartest move, but I think it's what had to be done given the financial hardships that the park was facing.
So sort of that decline, how did the park and the fair go together? How did they, like, what was that relationship? Because I sort of have, and I hope this is a real memory, but I have this blip of little memory of going to some type of rodeo maybe, and then exiting the rodeo into the amusement park and being shown by my parents the Zippin Pippin and then leaving is what I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I know the rodeo was a huge part of the fair. Essentially, during the fair, Libertyland was open. It was part of the fair technically, and so you could go into Libertyland for free, and then you would pay per ride, or you would pay for a wristband, as opposed to when the fair wasn't in operation, you would pay a general admission for the fair for the most part, aside from some, it was like most theme parks, you would pay for admission and then you could ride most of the rides for free, except anything that was like an upcharge. So yeah, that was the first time that I visited Libertyland, was during the fair. Because I remember riding the Ferris wheel at the fair. Libertyland had its own Ferris wheel for a while, and seeing the Revolution, the Zippin Pippin off in the distance. And I still, to this day, that is such a vivid memory, because I remember seeing this bright white roller coaster in the distance and just being I was like, what is that? That looks so cool. And so for many people, they only visited Libertyland because of the fair. So I know that was a successful time. I think the park made a lot of money during that time, just because there were so many people there who otherwise wouldn't have visited the park.
So what about any favorite memories that people told you that you just found really impactful or charming or whatever, and whether they made it into the book or not? I'd love to hear one or two or something.
Yeah, there were so many stories that people told me, and unfortunately, given the format of the book, which is is very image focused, so that each image has a caption under it, and so unfortunately, I wasn't able to incorporate too many stories into that. But again, as I kind of rebuild rememberlibertyland.com, that's some of the things that I hope to incorporate. But I remember one gentleman who worked at the park, maybe in maintenance, I think, but Elvis Presley, who of course rented out the park regularly, Zippin Pippin was his favorite roller coaster. I think one night he lost his belt buckle on the ride, and this guy was actually able to find it, and very honest man, returned it to Elvis's people. And so I just thought that was so cool. Elvis, he would rent out the park and he would go from ride to ride, and they would, I think if I recall correctly, they would have one employee staffed at one of the Pronto Pup stands, because he would eat Pronto Pups and ride the Zippin Pippin over and over. I mean, it sounds like a fantastic time, if you ask me. I talked to one of the guys who wore the Libertyland Hound Dog mascot costume, and he said they could only stay in the costume for 30 minutes because it would overheat so quickly. Wow. That it was I guess a health hazard. So they were limited to 30 minutes inside the costume. So were there a lot of them that worked it, or did the hound just only show up every once in a while? Yeah, I guess he only showed up every once in a while. So yeah, it was of course a very heavy costume as well. So you had to be really dedicated to play that role, so to speak. That's funny. And then you had the memories of people the employees who worked at the park and could go and ride rides while on their breaks, and the people who were able to go and ride the Zippin Pippin over and over again. I mean, just so many little memories of here and there that, to the average person might not seem that spectacular, but, obviously if you live them and they stick with you this many years, it's really interesting. There was the Frisco steam engine that was immediately inside the entrance of the park, along with the caboose. The caboose stayed at the park until until it closed, but the steam engine was moved in the mid '80s to Collierville, where it still stands today. And to get that out, it had been moved there, I think in maybe 1950. It was donated to the children of Memphis. For whatever reason, it was moved out of the park, I think, to be restored. And to move it out, they had to basically leapfrog. It's a method called leapfrogging, where they had to, this is massive steam engine, they had to build a section of track behind the steam engine, pull it just enough, take the section of track out in front of it, and then move it to the back and then pull it back. And they pulled it all the way to the railroad tracks that parallel Southern Avenue. It took like a whole weekend, all of these volunteers.
Wow.
Just a task of that scale, it just makes me cringe to think of all the work that had to go into that. And so just little things like that you might not find on a park brochure or something like that, but we're really special to those people.
So fascinating. Is there anything else about general Libertyland trivia that we should know before I start asking you some silly lightning round questions?
Sure. So I think just the Libertyland trivia is the cool thing to me is where some of the rides have ended up. So the Revolution now operates in the Philippines. It's been repainted. Yeah, it's in the Philippines now at a park. I was actually able to get in touch with someone there who sent photos for me to use. Glorious Fantasyland is the name of it. And it actually was bought by a park in Pennsylvania, and it was moved there and sat in the field for years. And they were going to build it, but then it just wasn't feasible. I don't think they were able to afford reconstructing it. And so I thought, well, it's done for now. But then this park in the Philippines bought it. Of course, there's a replica of the Zippin Pippin that was built in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was able to ride that. It's all new. There's nothing, unfortunately, of the original, but it's the same layout, the same feel. It's very surreal riding it. Little things like that, how it's been scattered. I get people will see things in antique stores and buy them for me. It's just fascinating to see where pieces of the park have ended up. So that's always trivia I like to share with people is, and that's actually the final chapter of the book. It's kind of covering where all the pieces of the park ended up, or as many. And unfortunately there's a lot that we'll never know where they ended up or if they're even still in existence today. But thankfully we do know where a lot of the park is now.
Well, that leads me into some fun lightning round questions. So here we go.
Okay.
All right. So a magical genie is going to allow you to bring back one Libertyland ride. What would it be?
Oh, Zippin Pippin for sure. And its original location, materials, train, hands down.
All right.
Because I can go, if I ever want to take a trip to the Philippines, I can go and ride the Revolution. But there's nothing can beat the Zippin Pippin. And the carousel is reopening at the Children's Museum next month, so I'll be able to go and ride that again.
Yeah, that'll be great. You have to share a picture when you go on our Facebook page.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, if you were a Libertyland attraction, which one would you be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would probably say the Revolution, just the craziness of my life, the loops and and everything. I would probably say that compared to the Zippin Pippin, it's a little bit smoother, but and not as old, but still kind of a wild ride. But I think any ride at Libertyland, you're going to be comparing yourself to an amusement park ride. So I definitely don't want to be one of the boring ones. So I think I'd have to say the Revolution.
All right. Which land in Libertyland would you choose to live in for all eternity?
Colonial land, by far. You had the Zippin Pippin, all the trees. I love trees, absolutely love trees. So to have those big trees, standing above you, I love the architecture of that area, the gardens, the Liberty Bell replica. It was just a very quaint area of the park. I think it was the most immersive, I don't know if I want to say historically accurate, but with the Liberty Bell replica, it's pretty accurate. So yeah, I would definitely live in the Colonial Land area.
All right. And then the last one, the Zippin Pippin and the Revolution are in a boxing match. Who wins?
Zippin Pippin, hands down. It's got the street cred, the age, the angle of being Elvis Presley's favorite. Yeah, it would, no brainer.
All right. Well, tell everyone how they can get your book.
Yeah, so you can go to libertylandbook.com, order it there. It's at bookstores across Memphis, Burke's Books and Cooper Young, Book Juggler on South Main, the new novel bookstore, which used to be the Booksellers at Laurelwood, Barnes & Nobles. I'm going to have a book signing. I've got some book signings scheduled, and just in case they change after this podcast is aired, they're all listed on libertylandbook.com, so you can buy them there. You can buy that on my publisher's website, on Amazon, but I like to tell people to shop local and visit a bookstore.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, John, for coming on the show, telling us about Libertyland. And I think everyone's we're going to be just bombarded with stories and memories. I just know it.
Oh, I can't wait to see him again. I hope my goal with this book was really to be a tangible object, to kind of, as cliche as it sounds, to keep the memories alive and be a reminder and a way as people can connect and share those stories, even if they weren't, in the book. But it was an absolute pleasure to be on here and to be able to talk about the park. So I love the show. I love the book. It's a pleasure.
Well, thanks. Thank you for coming on and sharing all your knowledge. And for putting it in a book. I know Memphis is going to love it. They're going to love the website and getting to relive everything Libertyland. So head over to show notes, memphistypehistory.com/Libertyland. We'll have all the links, everything we mentioned here, plus all those cool photos and probably some other gems that we haven't even thought of yet. So yeah, be sure to go over there. So you've been listening to Memphis Type History, the podcast.
We like your type.
You've been listening to Memphis Type History, the podcast. It would mean so much to us if you head over to iTunes and give us a rating and review. Be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode.
Want to be part of Memphis Type History and get behind-the-scenes content, merch, and more? Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Memphis Type History. That's Patreon, spelled patreon.com/Memphis Type History.
Find more Memphis Type History on our blog at memphistypehistory.com, on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest as Memphis Type History, and on Twitter at Memphis Type.
So in case you guys don't realize this, Memphis Type History is not just a podcast, and you probably already know that it is a blog, but it's also a book. We wrote a book and published it in 2014, right?
We did.
And it's called Memphis Type History, Science and Stories from Just Around the Corner. Written by me, Caitlin, and illustrated by Rebecca. And, well, I don't know. That's not a good way to put it. Not illustrated by, but it has your Memphis type illustrated paintings in it. So each of Rebecca's paintings is the jumping off point for the history in each chapter. And you can buy the book in Memphis.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. So one of the places in Memphis that you can get our book is More Than Words in Germantown.
More than words.
Oh, go ahead.
More than words, we love you.
Oh, I thought you were going to sing the song More Than Words.
Oh, more than words. Yes, thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a good song.
It is.
And I have a fun history fact to tell you about Germantown, where More Than Words is located.
Oh, please tell.
During World War I, because there's a lot of anti-German sentiment in the U.S., Germantown changed its name.
Really?
Yeah. For a little while, it was briefly known as Neshoba, which is an Indian word that means wolf.
Oh, okay. And then it went back to Germantown.
Yeah. So if you want to go to Germantown, past alias Neshoba, head over to West Street and visit More Than Words and pick up our book.
More than words.